Welcome to today's webinar, Beyond the Busy Season, Year-Round Business Strategies that Yield Consistent Cash Flow, brought to you by Landscape Management and by our sponsor, SureGuard LandOpt. I'm Allison Barwitz from North Coast Media, digital editor for Landscape Management magazine, and I will be your event manager. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. The recording will be available 1 day from today on our website, landscapemanagement.net/webinars. A link to the on-demand recording will also be emailed to you when it is available. At this time, I'd like to acquaint you with the ways in which you can participate during today's presentation. Please notice that in the lower left-hand corner of your console, there is a Submit button. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Just type in the text box at the bottom left, then click Submit to place your question in the line. Questions that were submitted during registration may be covered in this webinar. Some questions may also be answered in an upcoming issue of Landscape Management magazine or in one of our weekly e-newsletters, LM Direct. We strive to answer as many of your questions as possible. Also, feel free to join the conversation on Twitter at #BeyondBusySeason. If you use the hashtag, your tweets will show up on the Twitter feed on the right-hand side of your console. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, select Help to submit your issue, and assistant producer Bethany Chambers or I will personally assist you. Also, CEUs are available for attending this webinar. Webinar attendees can receive 1 CEU toward Planet/NALP Landscape Industry Certified Recertification. Now, I'd like to turn today's event over to our moderator, Landscape Management Associate Editor, Sarah Pfledderer.
Thank you, Allison, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. We have a great topic and an excellent speaker lined up for today's session. Let's welcome our speaker, Steven Bach, who's a success coach at LandOpt, the sponsor of this webinar. For a little bit on LandOpt, it's a licensor of business systems and processes to more than 30 landscape companies across the U.S. Steven coaches and mentors powered by LandOpt Contractors, focusing on training, implementation, and adherence to the LandOpt system. With more than 10 years of sales and management experience, Steven uses his broad-based knowledge of sales, business trends, and best practices to ensure continuous success for the contractors he serves. Also, we'd like to say thank you again to LandOpt for sponsoring the webinar. And with that, we'll turn it over to Steven.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate the introduction. As you alluded to, we have a very good topic and something that I'm very passionate about and look forward to having a very productive webinar here today. As some others have said already, please feel free to type your questions in the chat, and I will absolutely do my best to get to them all. I do appreciate the questions that you all did submit in the registration process, and we'll talk about them all and definitely address them all, hopefully to your liking. So with that being said, let's get started. So today's agenda, first we're going to kind of get into some of the nuts and bolts of cash flow planning and what it is and what you all should and could be looking at. Then we're going to talk about creating a recurring revenue stream and how that will impact your cash. We'll get into how to understand and how to properly pre-plan for operations and give you a few tips and pointers there. And then we'll look at managing away overtime, looking at advanced scheduling and some things like that. And lastly, we'll get into how to establish a line of credit with your own cash and how to productively do that with your banks. Then I hope that we have a nice, robust question and answer session where we can answer some of your specifics. So cash flow statements, what are they and why do we collect them and why do we create them and frankly, who cares? So what we're going to kind of do over the next few slides here is talk about how it impacts everybody in your in your organizations. And I apologize, I did kind of jump slides just a bit. So cash flow statements, who cares and why? First, we're going to take a look at the employees. So creates confidence that the compensation will be delivered as promised. Nobody wants to work for an organization that they have to worry about whether their checks are going to bounce and if they have to hold their check that they received on Friday till Monday. We want to make sure that we have that confidence in each and every one of our team members that we're going to be able to make payroll. It also helps them to envision and visualize their career path and making sure that their financial goals line up with their career path. So it really instills that confidence to all of the players on the team that we're going to be around tomorrow and we're cash flush, so to speak. Our suppliers and subcontractors, similar concept, but at a different layer, if you will. It helps us instill the confidence that the prompt payment will occur. Create sound business partnerships that ultimately help you deliver outstanding service to your customers. When you have an open relationship with your suppliers and subcontractors, it allows for a little bit of slack, if you will, in the ordering process and the receiving process. So having a proper cash flow statement will really instill that confidence that we can potentially be a little flexible and that we're not trying to get squirrely and short pay them because we're getting ready to go out of business or we don't have the cash. So it really allows that confidence. So following up on the cash flow statements, who cares and why? Who cares and why? What does it mean to our business owners and accountants? Again, it ensures that that payroll will be covered and a confidence that bills will be paid. Nobody wants to have that reputation around town that you don't want to be doing business with because they always stretch their payments and are extending their terms every chance that they have. Moving on to those same lenders and creditors, be that internal or external, it instills confidence that the debt will be repaid and assures that interest and the fees will not be compromised. Okay. If we are stretching terms and there's penalties that are incurred with that, we are going to be able to take those on and pay those and know what they are in advance. We can make informed decisions as to what those penalties are and if we're willing to pay those penalties. Moving on into our potential investors, you'll sense the theme here that it's confidence, confidence, confidence. It creates that confidence in the financial stability of the company. For those of us that are big Shark Tank watchers these days, this is very important and something that Mr. Wonderful and Mark Cuban consistently ask. But reassurance that investment money will be used for stated intent. If we're potentially getting money from potential investors, they want to have the confidence that you're going to use it for its intent and not just inflate your salary or take a vacation or give everybody a bunch of bonuses. Okay, so it ensures that the money that the investors are potentially going to give you is being utilized in the way that it was given to them. So getting on with some of the house cleaning items on cash flow planning, if you will. Cash flow statements and cash flow planning process is important to all stakeholders of the business so that they can be confident, there's that word again, that the entity is at the very least a going concern. Okay, for those of us not familiar with a going concern is a business that functions without the intention or threat of liquidation for the foreseeable future. Typically, that foreseeable future, if you will, is 12 months out. So, in a nutshell, cash flow is giving everybody that's associated with the business, from employees to investors and everybody in between, that confidence that we have enough cash to make it work for the next 12 months. A going concern, if you will. The cash flow statement is intended to do, it's going to provide information about an entity's liquidity and solvency. It's going to normalize the comparison of operating performance of different entities by eliminating the effects of different accounting methods. How many of us are using QuickBooks or using other methods out there where we look at things and are we running our books on a cash basis or an accrual basis, or maybe we don't even have an accounting system at this point. Maybe we're just keeping track of all our invoicing via spreadsheets. A cash flow statement and cash flow planning will allow all of that to be put in one platform, if you will. All of those separate entities get rolled up into one cash flow planning statement. When you talk about financial planning, there's things that you can put into the financial plan, there's things that you can't. When you talk about the income statement, there's costs that you can put in there and there's costs that you can't. The cash flow plan does not judge whatsoever. If you have cash going out, it's going to be on your cash flow statement. If you have cash coming in, it's going to be on your cash flow statement, no matter where it's derived from, be that the financial plan, your income statement, your balance sheet, or any other factor for that matter. It's going to show changes in your assets, liabilities, and equity and help predict the amount, the timing, and the probability of future cash flows. It's all about the amount, the timing, and the probability of those future cash flows. How likely are we to receive the cash that we are anticipating? And more importantly, what is the timeline of receiving said cash? Okay. I say that because of some of the questions that we received earlier, and I'll tie that back together at the end of the presentation for everybody. So cash flow planning, the structure of cash flow planning. Cash flow statement is broken down and organizes the sources and uses of cash and cash equivalents by the following business activities. You got your operating activities, your investing activities, and your financing activities. And next couple of slides here, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about what the difference between each of those activities are and why we look at them separately, and then we'll circle back to how to potentially impact them. So operating activities basically support the marketing, sales, production, and delivery of the company's products and services. Okay, this is all the day-to-day activities, things that are required to run the business. Payments from customer invoices is going to be the majority of the top-line revenue and the cash in. Payroll checks and reimbursements to employees. Payments to suppliers and subcontractors. We need to make sure they're all getting paid so that we don't potentially get shut off. Tax payments. We need to make sure we're making our quarterly tax payments. Okay. For those of us not familiar with that, please make sure you get yourself familiarized with that, or that will potentially turn into a bigger cash problem down the line. And then our loan interest payments. Okay. We've got to make sure that we're making our loan interest payments. The next important area on cash flow planning is investing activities. Investing activities are buying and selling of long-term assets that support the licensee's ability to be a successful competitor in the marketplace. Okay, don't get confused with the licensees there. That's a general landscaping contractor that can be defined as. Licensees are powered by LandOpt. But these include more higher level things such as capital expenditures and sales of plant or property or equipment, kind of like assets. Investments in other firms for both strategic and financial purposes. Maybe we're going to spin off and buy another company, maybe not associated with your landscaping companies. Okay. Investments in marketable securities and other financial instruments. Okay, are we working with our financial planner to invest in some maybe longer term stocks and bonds or mutual funds or what have you, but more long-term investments. The investing activities are just that, longer term investments and not typically day-to-day activities. Next, we have financing activities. Again, this is a little bit more high-level cash flow planning and things that we look at not as consistently, not as day-to-day as some of the operating activities. But I had a question that was submitted earlier is, what is the best system to establish a consistent revenue stream for partners and owners in a landscape business? And that kind of speaks to this slide, and I just kind of wanted to call that out a little bit, and we'll address it further. But financing activities include the entity's cash flow to and from investors, banks, shareholders, sale or repurchase of company stock, dividend payments, proceeds from repayment or debt principal, and repayment of capital leases. Okay, this is kind of fancy for if we're pulling money out of the company. Okay, when partners and owners want to take dividends out, we need to make sure that there's ample cash for the owners or business partners to be able to pull that cash out. Okay, so cash flow is very important to make sure that the owners aren't kind of overdrawing, so to speak, the amount of cash out of the business that could potentially hurt them. So for today's presentation, we're going to kind of get back to those operating activities. Again, operating activities are going to support the marketing, sales, production, and delivery of your company's products and services. Okay, just as a kind of a backup. Payments from the customers and invoices, payroll checks and reimbursements, payments to suppliers and contractors, tax payments, and loan interest payments. So the first area that we want to get into when we talk about the operating activities, and we have to be able to know how much cash we're getting in. So the first thing we're going to take a look at here today is how do we create that revenue stream? We can have the best payment plan in the world, but if we don't have the cash and revenue coming in to support it, it's kind of all for nothing. So the first area we're going to talk about is creating that revenue stream. And it all starts with sales. We have to hire the right sales professional. We have to talk with that sales professional up front about what they are hired to do. Sales professionals aren't hired to work hard. Sales professionals are hired to hit numbers and redeem sales plans, and we have to be very clear with what our sales objectives are all the way into the hiring process. Next area I have here is proper plan setting and commission structure. If we need long-term contracts and we need cash to come in on a very predictable basis, then we need to make sure that we are setting the sales plans for the sales professionals to go along with that. We also have to make sure that the commission structure is more rewarding for the long-term agreements that we want to get and less rewarding for some of the project and short-term agreements. So we need to make sure that we have a proper plan and commission structure. Next thing is selling long-term agreements. Okay. No longer are selling short-term agreements or individualized services going to be acceptable. When you're trying to manage your cash and predict your cash, you want to have a guaranteed amount coming in every month. And we talk about long-term agreements. Powered by LandOpt contractors sell what we call leveled billing or levelized billing, where a customer of one of ours will pay the same amount for all 12 months of the year. Matter of fact, they sign nothing but 36-month contracts. So for instance, to explain that a little more, they can't call our clients and say, come do a spring cleanup and I will pay you $1,500. Or can you cut my grass this week and I will pay you $100. The contracts look more like, we will charge you $500 a month for the next 36 months and everything is included. We'll mow your lawn, we'll do your spring cleanup, we'll do whatever we determine will be included in that. But that is kind of the cornerstone of today's presentation, is getting those long-term agreements in place and those 36-month contracts where we can ensure that they are going to be paying the exact same amount of cash for the next 36 months. Another thing that we kind of do to ensure that is we require ACH payments so that we don't get the, whoops, I'm out of town and forgot to mail the check, I'll pay you double next month. We'll get everybody set up on ACH so that we know on the first of every month that money is already in the bank account. Okay, so creating the revenue stream is first and foremost absolutely most important, and the high levels are long-term agreements, levelized billing, 12 months out of the year. Okay, They don't pay more in the summer and less in the winter, and that speaks to some of the other questions that people had about snow services that we'll address at the end of the presentation here today. So when you look at predictable resources, we kind of have this fancy graph here, and if you notice the white line is what we define as post-build and unpredictable revenue. That's the one-off phone calls. Somebody calls in and says, can you do this for me? Can you cut my grass for me once? I will pay you upon completion. You have highs and lows, and when it's good, but when it's bad, it's bad. When you get 12-month even pay, it provides predictable revenue flow, and you see that you stay the same across all 12 months. You know exactly how much revenue and cash will be received by your organization every month for the entire year. You normalize your cash flow and get it straight line versus trying to manage the highs and lows and the peaks and valleys. Very simple but effective graph, one that we use in our coaching very, very often here at LandOpt. So again, on the creating of the revenue stream, we have a concept of upsells that we use here at LandOpt. And basically, upsells are adding services to the life cycle of the agreement. So when we have that 36-month contract, we are constantly trying to add services to it. Every time we add services, we want to extend the terms when adding or subtracting services. Every time we get in there, we're going to stretch it out for another 36 months. My next line here, I have getting creative with maintenance versus project billing. I don't know how many of you listening in out there have what I'll call a maintenance agreement or a recurring agreement where they are doing services ongoing, and the customer will call and say, can I get some mulch put in? Or can I get some flowers put in July? And most companies will say, absolutely, let me give you a price and I will do that for you next week or whatever the details are. What we try to push our licensees to do and our account managers is rolling that into the 12-month contract versus billing them separately for that. So rather than them having a balloon payment when they want the flowers put in, let's say, June, they're just going to increase their monthly fee by a small amount and pay on that all year round versus a balloon payment. Okay? It allows us to start collecting their cash prior to us executing the work. So when we do execute the work, we've already collected enough cash to get it taken care of. So getting creative with that. Again, I can't stress enough how important that is to not take the low-hanging fruit and jump at the quick revenue and say, yes, I'll come do it, but getting more of a relationship with the customer and getting it wrapped into their long-term contract versus a one-off contract. And again, if any questions on this at any time, feel free to type them in. So this brings me to another pretty valuable graphic we use here at LandOpt. We call it the value of predictable cash. And you see you can see it there on the right where our definitions are, but the new sales are the gray bars. And we know that depending on how many sales reps we have or don't have, we're going to be able to make X amount of new sales. The challenge becomes selling those new sales every year to have enough cash to make our businesses viable. So what we want to do is start to retain our sales via long-term contracts and then add to it. And you can see how our cost of sales starts off high and starts to get lower, but as we retain revenue and continue to sell the same amount every year, that cash, that predictable cash and that predictable revenue grows quite significantly as we start to add on those longer term contracts. Okay. Again, a very simple graph, but something that our licensees and our contractors find very important and one of the biggest values that we bring to them. So after we've kind of talked about some of the ways that we can impact the cash flow inputs, the revenue, if you will, talking about sales and predicting that revenue, it's time to kind of get into how do we use that to pre-plan operations, and how can pre-planning operations positively or negatively impact my cash flow. So when we talk about pre-planning operations, one of the first things we have to ask ourselves are, what are my heavy cash flow outlays? Typically, there are capital purchases, our materials, our loan payments, and our taxes. So as we start to talk about those cash outflows, we're going to kind of just pause a little bit because I do have a question from the audience, and the audience question is, what's the best way to approach customers about long-term contracts? Boy, if I had the easy answer for that, I'd be pretty rich right now. But it's not an easy answer, and I think there's a couple things that come to mind. One, you have to have the relationship with the customer before we can have that conversation. If our customers don't know who we are and we haven't been the best, we haven't had a really good relationship with them, and all of a sudden here comes Billy walking up to the door saying, hey, we got this new thing and we're going to sign long-term contracts, we're going to get some pushback. So my first answer to that would be, make sure we have the relationship with the customer that they feel safe around us and they can let their guards down. After that relationship is established, then we can have what we call candor here at LandOpt and have that open conversation about what's in it for them if they sign a long-term contract. You know, a couple things that we have to always educate them on is that it's the same. Okay, their total spend is going to be roughly the same, only they're not going to have the heavy outlays of cash during busy seasons for them. The other thing is they can plan their cash flow. Okay, they don't have to worry about if they have a wet spring and they have to cut the grass every 3 days, or we have a really bad winter and they have to plow every day instead of once a week. So we have to let them know that this isn't heavy in our favor and it's not heavy in their favor. It's a risk involved for everybody. We're going to take care of the property. So to answer your question directly, you have to have a very, very good relationship with your customers to be able to approach them with that. That's for your existing customers. When you're talking about new customers, that's very simply fixed with proper salesmanship. You just make that clear in the hiring process that we don't sell anything other than 36-month levelized contracts, and if that goal is set and agreed upon in the hiring process, and you have a true sales professional, not an industry professional trying to sell, it won't be an issue. The LandOpt sales reps that don't have industry experience whatsoever really don't have a hard time selling that whatsoever. It's pretty easy, and there's no debate about it. It is what it is. What I'll call legacy customers are the ones that we have to be a little more gentler with and make sure that we have a good relationship before trying to approach them on long-term contracts. Very good question, though. So back onto the presentation here, pre-planning operations. What are my heavy cash flow outlays? Your capital purchases and when you're going to make them, your materials, your loan payments, and your taxes, and understanding what drives them. Okay, what drives those heavy cash outlays and how can we impact them? So how do we impact capital purchases? One, we have to have disciplined spending. If our financial plan says that we are going to add a crew, we need to understand what is driving that additional crew. How much cash do we need to have in the bank to be able to make those capital purchases? How much revenue do we want to have before we make that capital purchases, or that capital purchase, and then have the discipline to adhere to that and not say, well, maybe I'll buy it a little early because it'll be easier if I have it beforehand. So disciplined spending on the capital purchases and purchasing 101, whether you're in business or not. Make sure you're defining the difference between a want and a need. Everybody wants the brand new 2015 trucks. Do they really need them? The other thing is that ability to shop around for the price and terms. When you have proper cash flow planning and you have predictable cash coming in, you can shop around for better price and terms. You can approach car dealerships and vendors and things like that and ask them when the next big incentives are coming and if it's advantageous for you or for the dealership to wait a month or wait a few months and talk about what the interest rates are going to potentially do. When you know that you're getting the same amount of cash in every month, you have that ability to shop around for the best price and the best terms, and we aren't buying things quick, fast, and in a hurry, and not running out and buying things at the most expensive rates because it's most convenient. So how do we impact materials? One of the toughest things with impacting materials is how much work are we going to do and how many materials do we actually need? It's very difficult to know how much materials we're going to need if we don't have levelized contracts. When we are at the mercy of salesmanship and the phone ringing, it's very difficult to determine what our needs will be in a given year. When we have all of our contracts in 36 months and we know what's included in them, my Powered by LandOpt licensees, they know exactly how much mulch they need for every one of their mulch accounts already, and they've known that for the past 6 months. So they've been able to negotiate and talk with different vendors to kind of pre-buy some of those materials and get some early purchase advantages. But it all goes back to that salesmanship and that ability to get everything in under long-term contracts so that we understand exactly how much our mulch costs will be, exactly how many chemicals we're going to need in a given year. If every time we have to, every time we get a phone call, we have to stop at the mulch yard and pick stuff up, you're going to be paying top dollar for that mulch. You might be spending $40, $50 a yard on that mulch, versus if we can get it in bulk at the beginning of the year, it'll be much more advantageous for us. So when we have a proper cash flow statement and a proper revenue plan, we know when they are needed and how that lines up with our revenue. Okay. We can pre-buy our materials and again, get those payment terms, get those bulk purchases, and be able to impact them. Okay, so in a typical year, we have some really heavy cash outlays in the spring season when we're doing all our spring cleanups, all our mulching, all our plantings are all getting done, and we haven't started receiving that revenue yet. Those can be some very tough times in those early parts of the busy season. Kind of reinforcing the slide there that we just went over, typical landscape contractors are poor bankers. Okay, and on this one, because in a couple slides we're going to have a very similar graph, but you can see that our direct costs are in gray here, and they kind of go up and down, and in some areas our direct costs exceed our revenue collections. We are what you call upside down on our cash. We are spending more cash than we are taking in. And you can see the dark blue down below is our revenue, which somewhat fluctuates, and we have some peaks and valleys. Okay. Kind of reiterating some of the earlier slides. So when you look at the next slide, and again, it looks very similar, and at a quick glance you might say, did he advance the slide? Yes, I did advance the slide. So what this one is showing is it's the same slide, only with what we'll call here's my shameless plug, a Powered by LandOpt contractor, where our revenue is very predictable and our cash is very predictable. Prepayment allows for positive cash flow. When our cash flow is predictable and the same, you can see how our direct costs fluctuate, but our revenue stays the same across it. So it very clearly shows that we're going to make it with cash in this graphic. Again, very simple graphs, but in my opinion, very powerful and really helps you understand how critical that prepayment and that collection of cash is for positively running our businesses. So pre-planning, how do we impact loans and taxes? Okay, and this goes back to some of the questions that we'll address at the end, but first and foremost, we need to have a plan. That plan needs to say what our minimum loan payments are, what our minimum taxes are, and how to make those payments. So, you know, who can we be flexible on, who can we float, if you will, and who can we not float? And what are the penalties involved if we do float them? When we do need cash, we need to understand what the bank needs to see. Okay. When you're talking about trying to approach banks for loans and you go in and say, you know, oh, my business typically does, you know, between $1.5 and $2 million, that's not going to exude the confidence that a banker wants to see that you're going to be able to pay that loan back if they give you money. When you go in and say, typically I do between $1.5 and $2 million, and over the next 3 years I already have 1.25 under contract, even if I don't sell another job, that exudes a lot more confidence in the banker for them to get a little more free with the money, if you will. I can't tell you how many times our licensees will go into a bank with a cash flow plan laid out for the next 3 years, as well as their financial plan and strategic plan, and the banks are blown away and say, I typically don't see this with landscapers. So talk with your banker about what they need to see and how we can present it to them, and make sure that our cash flow statements are supporting what they want to see. How much flexibility will you have with or without a plan? You're not going to have a lot of flexibility if you don't have a proper cash flow plan. You're going to get what we call expensive money if you get it at all. When you meet with the banks and you say, boy, I need $25,000 today to make payroll tomorrow, that's going to be some pretty expensive money. Versus if you would have met with your banker 3 or 4 months ago and said, here's my cash flow plan for the next 3 years, and you can see that in April I dip cash negative, and I'm going to need to borrow some money in April, but I will pay it back in, as you can see by my cash flow plan, I will pay it all back by June. That's what you need when you meet with your bank. And understand that cash gives you the ability to negotiate. When you don't have a strong cash flow plan, you're kind of at the mercy of what the bank is willing to do. So understand that that cash gives you that ability to negotiate with your banks, and make sure that you have it laid out in a nice, easy to understand way. So when we talk about scheduling and when labor needs are known in advance, and again, goes back to the similar, you know, it all starts with sales, similar to what we discussed earlier. When labor needs are known in advance, it allows for proactive decisions on the number of employees needed. Okay, when you know exactly how much work you already have under contract for next year, you know exactly how many employees are needed. You also know how to potentially eliminate overtime. Eliminates or minimizes overtime through proper scheduling, saves significant cash. Again, powered by LandOpt contractors, some have zero overtime. We make sure that they're all getting less than 5%, because you know exactly what your schedule is and how many hours you have for all your different services throughout the entire year, and you don't have the fluctuations of, well, the phone rang a lot this week, so we got to work overtime this week. Okay, again, those long-term contracts that are levelized, you know exactly how, not only how much cash is coming in, but you know how many hours are associated with the work that needs to be performed, and you can impact that. So how you can impact that is, rather than trying to do, you know, all of your spring cleanups in 1 week, you can spread them out and be a little bit more patient over, let's say, a month, so that you don't have to run all that overtime in 1 week. Allows you to determine service levels and reach agreement with subcontractors. So let's say that, using the same example, since it is kind of springtime, those spring cleanups, well, let's just say that weather and we have to get all of our spring cleanups in that 1 week. Well, we can determine some service levels and reach agreements with subcontractors if we know exactly how much work we're going to be giving them. Okay? We know how much we'll do internal and how much we can get done in that given week without running overtime. And everything else that's left over, because we know our numbers and have those long-term agreements, we can get that over to our subcontractors and, again, negotiate some better terms with them. When you approach a sub and say, I'm going to give you X amount of work, what's that worth to you? That's a lot better than, will you be my subcontractor and I'll call you when I need you. Again, it allows us to be in the driver's seat when we have proper cash flow management and we know exactly how much cash is coming in. That will allow us to positively impact our labor and things like that. So creating a line of credit, as you know, we keep talking about here, always remember that cash is king. The goal for everybody on this call is obviously to get cash flush. Creating your own cash reserves minimizes dependency on a commercial line of credit. Not only will you find life a lot easier when you can play your own bank, but it's just another angle for you to potentially make money. If you are loaning money to the business, you'll be able to pay yourself back with the interest at a lower interest rate than if you were paying the loan back to your local bank or any other commercial institution. So not only will you get a more favorable interest rate when you're borrowing cash from yourself, but you will also make some more money yourself because you're paying yourself back the interest. Always remember finding the balance between saving and spending. It's no different than juggling our personal lives or your credit cards. You know, if let's say your salary is $10,000 a month and your credit card statement is $10,000, you don't want to pay your entire credit card balance off and then have no cash for the rest of the month. So you want to find that balance between that saving and spending of your cash. How much if you knew exactly, you know, how much you were going to put on your credit card every month, you could not pay as much down on the principal on your credit card. So find that balance between saving and spending, and you will all be much further ahead there. Distribute your cash into short and long-term accounts and avoid those penalties. Again, when you know how much cash is coming in, you can move your money around into those short-term and long-term accounts. Similar to your personal lives, you want to move things into some interest-bearing accounts so that you can earn interest on it and not just have everything in your checking account where you're not getting as much. But also understand the penalties involved if you have to move cash from short-term to long-term accounts, and make sure you're diversified within those so that, you know, if that time comes where we need some additional cash, we can get it quickly and easily without paying significant penalties. And again, just those preferred interest rates are very, very important. All right, we are through for the delivery portion of today's webinar, and I want to kind of circle back to some specific questions that I have received from some of you all when you guys were registering. The first question is, how do I deal with late paying customers and the ones that don't pay at all? Fair question, and similar to some of the earlier ones, not an easily answered one. My question would be, how and why are we doing business with a customer that even has that ability to not pay? So my first response would be, we should be catching that in the sales process that they are potentially not a fit for us because we are seeing warning signs of that. So understanding that to try to avoid those customers in the first place. Number 2 on that is dealing with late customers and ones that don't pay at all, is making sure that our payment terms and our legal agreements are advantageous to us. Make sure we're very clear with what is due as a down payment for projects, what is due for check-ins or project check-ins or midway points, and then how we will collect that cash at the end. And just speaking from the LandOpt perspective, our project managers and sales reps, they collect that on the last day of the project. And they are very clear with that in the sales process that is how it's going to be done. The last thing I'll leave you with is kind of on the maintenance side, is that the customers prepay. And what I mean by that is they are paying for the next month. Okay, so if they get a bill, let's say January 25th, and that is due by February 1st, that is for February. And make sure that your terms are tight enough, 15 days, 30 days, that if you're not getting paid at 15 or 30 days, that you're calling them right away and saying, we're not going to be able to potentially service you if we don't get this taken care of. Again, 9 out of 10 times, if you hunt for the right customer, you won't get into that situation. But when you find yourself in that situation, don't dilly-dally too long and make sure that you are addressing it very proactively with the customer and letting them know that we don't work like that. But also keep your mind open for them to potentially have problems. Just like us, if they come to you and say, hey, I'm a little short this month, but look at my cash flow statement for the next 2 years. I'm a little short this month, but cash gets good for the next, whatever months, you might be willing to work with them. But if they come to you and say, I have no idea when it's going to get good, I don't do a cash flow plan, and I don't look at it, you're not exactly going to have the confidence to let them float a little bit longer. So I hope that answered your question for you. Next one here, I see we're a company that is looking to go more with turf care and less with snow services. What is your suggestion for revenue cash flow during a snowy winter if snow services are dropped? Again, goes back to my recommendation and LandOpt's recommendation is to sell 12-month levelized contracts. You receive the same amount of cash all 12 months out of the year, whether or not you have services or not. Going back to that one graph about direct costs, you just would not have significant cash outlays in those months that you weren't doing snow. That being said, I am a big advocate of snow, especially if you're pricing it properly and doing an all-inclusive contract and things like that. So I would first instruct you to maybe try to figure a way to do snow, but if not, always go with 12-month contracts, and then you're not at the mercy of the weather there. Next question I have is, what is the best operating system to use to keep track of everything for a small to mid-sized company? A do-it-all system that won't break the bank. Boy, again, if I could answer that question, I'd be rich and famous for sure. There's a number of them out there, and that's a really tough question for me to answer without knowing the size of your business and what you define as a do-it-all system. Does that include billing and payroll and tracking, or is it just customer data and estimating? There's not a lot of just out-of-the-box ones that work, in my opinion. LandOpt uses the Salesforce platform, but it is very customized and proprietary to us. But that's the platform that we use to build our proprietary system. So I'm not sure if that helps or not, but that's the beginning platform, if you will, that powered by LandOpt contractors use. Next question I have is, what weed control chemicals are pet friendly? Which is better, liquid or granular, for the best long-term weed control results? I think somebody got mixed up between webinars, but I'll just kind of give you my 2 cents on that. Is what is the customer value and what can we make a 40% gross margin on? It's all in what the customer values. Depends on what the outputs that the customer is trying to achieve are. Depending on their outputs and what margins we can get, that would change day to day. I'm not a horticulture guy, and you know, again, I'm for what the customer values. Last question I have here is, what is the best way system to establish a consistent revenue stream for partners and owners in a landscape business? Kind of talked about that a little bit before, and just understanding what that consistent revenue stream is for your partners and owners. Again, is the owner looking to siphon a salary out of it, or are there some additional ones? That's what we want to do, is make sure that the owners and partners are laying out how much cash they want to extract from the business for the next couple of years, and that the owners and investors aren't walking in to the general manager and saying, oh, by the way, I need $100,000 out of the business next week. Again, having that plan for all of the partners and owners, and you know, holding the owners and partners to what they commit to, you know, knowing that they can't just come in and say, we need to take a big draw. They have to lay out what those cash needs are so that we can plan for them. All right, so that is the questions that I've received thus far. I'm getting a few chats here, and Sarah is looking like she's going to type them in for me, so we'll get to the rest of your questions. Very good questions so far.
Really great information. Yeah, that was all really great information and stuff, and good job tackling that lawn care question. Now, we also have a few other pre-submitted ones from the audience, so I'll kind of shoot those your way now. One of those is, how can I encourage my customers to prepay without being too forward or pushy?
How can I encourage my customers to prepay? As with everything sales, I do the acronym WIFM, what's in it for them. If you aren't sold on what's in it for the customers, you're going to have a hard time convincing the customer of what's in it for them. On the commercial side, that ability to lay out your landscape budget for the next 3 years is typically a pretty big benefit for them, and understanding that you have to figure out what the customer values and present that to them so that they are okay with paying that way. If we can't do that, we kind of have to go back to the drawing board and make sure that we're working on our value statement that shows the WIFM, the what's in it for them, if they sign a long-term contract. It's not about dollars and cents. It's what's in it for them. What can they get out of it if they sign a long-term contract? And that's going to vary customer to customer depending on what they value.
Okay, great. And also, you said an important point was about getting creative with maintenance versus project billing. Can we circle back to that again, and kind of how much should people be upping those monthly payments as you suggested? Do you have any tips for proposing that to customers? Yes,
absolutely. So the price is the price. You know, you don't LandOpt contractors don't typically negotiate on price. The only thing that we will negotiate on is potentially terms. So when a customer calls and asks for something outside of the scope of their agreement, the typical contractor will say, absolutely, we'll do that for you, and I will submit you a bill when we're done. And those services are typically spring cleanups, flowers, mulching, pine straw in the south, whatever it is. A lot of companies will say, oh, that's great. You know, I'm going to put, you know, a couple hundred bales of pine straw out, and there's going to be a significant amount of money involved with that. We encourage the account managers to go and try and wrap that into the contract. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that we typically, customer XYZ spends $12,000 every year on a pine straw. Okay? So when they call and ask for that pine straw next year, rather than saying, no problem, we'll get you on the schedule, we'll get out there and get it taken care of, a good talk track might be, listen, customer XYZ, we've been doing business with you for quite some time, and every single year you call us and ask us to put in pine straw for you, and it costs you $12,000. Why don't we potentially look at getting that wrapped into your long-term contract so that we don't have to worry about any scheduling conflicts or anything like that? It's only going to up your monthly payments by $1,000. Are you okay with that, Mr. Customer? And that's typically what we do. And again, you have to have the relationship with the customer and the candor. If you just try to do that blindly, you're going to be fumbling over your words and not presenting it right. But that's kind of how they do it. Rather than submitting them that one-time $12,000 bill, they're going to roll it into their maintenance contract, increasing their monthly payments by $1,000. Everybody with me on the math? $12,000 divided by 12 months, $1,000 a month. It's going to increase their monthly payments by $1,000, but it's going to avoid them from stroking that $12,000 check every spring to you. I also have a question here that's typed in that says, do you do 3-year contracts with homeowners or just commercial customers? Short answer to that is both. We absolutely do 3-year contracts with homeowners and commercial customers. That is the standard. If they want to do a 1-year, they're going to have to ask us, and it's going to be a different cost involved with that. No different than, when I go to get my cell phone and I go to Verizon, they say it's a 2-year contract, and I say, oh, well, I'd like a 6-month contract. I don't have the ability to negotiate with them, and customers shouldn't have the ability to negotiate with you all.
Okay, good point. And kind of going back to the long-term contracts, do you have any tips for proposing those to customers? And also, do you advise limiting the number of long-term contracts the company has?
I do not advocate limiting the number of long-term contracts. The only time I will ever advocate not having all-inclusive long-term contracts is if you're a very heavy snow contractor. That's a whole different can of worms, but we look for a slightly different balanced portfolio. But the only time I would ever advocate a not all-inclusive 3-year contract would be for a super, super heavy snow company.
Okay, good deal.
Just circling back, what you asked me a question in the beginning part. What was the beginning part of that question that I skipped over?
Just tips for proposing long-term contracts to customers.
Yep, those tips, less is better. Sales 101, less is better. Be confident and be confident and be confident in what you're presenting. When we go in wishy-washy and say, do you think you might be interested in this 36-month contract, or would you want a 12-month contract? They're going to go for a 12-month every time. Not that I advocate not discussing it, but if they ask, our standard contract is a 36-month contract. If you try to over-explain it, customers going to get squirrely and potentially ask a lot more questions that don't need to be answered. So less is better, and be very confident and don't waver from the presentation of it.
Okay, great. And now maybe we can kind of steer our focuses towards banks, and maybe what's the best tactic for negotiating with a bank, especially when you don't have a significant cash flow?
Being open and honest about not having significant cash flow. When you are with the bank, again, they're bankers. They do this for a living. They're going to smell BS a mile away if you come in there trying to razzmatazz them. They're going to want to see a PowerPoint. They're going to want to see financials. They're going to want to see your contracts and make sure that your contracts are backing up what you're presenting. If you say that it's a 3-year all-inclusive contract, what are the exit terms? They're going to want to see your contracts to make sure that they're as solid as you're portraying them. So being very realistic about your cash flow is my best advice. Don't try to fluff it or BS it and try to falsify how many dollars you have under contract. They'll know exactly what you're up to, and when you admit that you're out of cash, but here's my plan to get out of it, and here's what I'm looking at, and by the way, cash isn't going to get better for another 18 months. They'll be a lot more receptive to working with you if you go that way.
All right, good deal.
I see another question from the audience.
Yeah.
It says, do your contracts have a price escalation in year 2 and 3 or just flat prices for the duration? How do you increase prices over time? Short answer is yes, they all do have a price escalation. At a bare minimum, it's 3%. LandOpt advocates going off the consumer price index. That way it's not the contractor raising the prices, it's the federal government raising the prices. So depending on what the consumer price index does, that will be the increase in the contracts. But absolutely, always have an increase.
All right. Here's another one. Are there any good ways to predetermine if a purchase will end up bringing a profit to a company?
Say that question one more time.
Sure. It says, are there any good ways to predetermine if a purchase will end up bringing profit to a company? How can you kind of plan ahead and anticipate if it's going to be a worthwhile purchase?
Okay, worthwhile capital purchase to the company.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So again, as with everything, we have to look at ROIs on things. So if we're looking at potentially buying a expensive piece of equipment like a mulch spreader or something like that, we have to do an ROI on that, and we have to understand what that's going to do to our vehicle and equipment costs, because we have a brand new shiny piece of equipment, and then we have to look at making those payments. How much efficiencies will we gain by using that piece of equipment? So kind of an easy thing to look at is the labor that I'm going to save by buying this mulch spreader, mulch mule, or whatever, is the labor I'm going to save by having this mulch mule going to cover the payment, so to speak, for that piece of equipment? 9 out of 10 times the answer is yes in the spring, but the challenge becomes, how do you pay for that piece of equipment in June and July when it's not being utilized, and you still have that $1,500 payment, but you're not saving any more on labor because they're not doing mulch anymore? So looking at how much you're going to save in labor and looking at that over all 12 months, making those payments. Anybody can make the payments when they're doing work with the piece of equipment, but how can you utilize that piece of equipment all 12 months out of the year?
Okay, good stuff. And kind of in that same vein, what about expenses you can't pay for? For example, how should you pay for equipment that unexpectedly breaks down?
So, piece of equipment that unexpectedly break down. The short book answer is we have cash reserves and lines of credit in place for when that does happen. We should never be in that tight of a cash position that if a piece of equipment goes down, we're potentially out of business. That's what we need to work with the banks to have that line of credit in place for when that does happen. When we're managing our cash properly and business is going good, everything is good, but it's only a matter of time till there's that hiccup, and that's when we need that line of credit. That's when we need our credit card. Our lines of credit and credit cards are for those emergencies when that does pop up, not for running our day-to-day business.
All right, and it looks like we have time for just one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Let's kind of focus on services here. One question is, if one of our most profitable services suddenly loses customer interest, how can we regain interest in our service, or should we focus on a different service?
Well, not an easy question again. Good questions too, by the way. So knowing our numbers is key. We have to know our most profitable services and what are our least profitable services. As with everything, if a customer decides to drop our most profitable service, we have to price the rest of the services to get us back to that right margin. And again, as with everything, LandOpt contractors, we get a 40% margin, and if they drop a service that brings it way down below 40%, we have to bring that gross margin back up to 40%. And again, as I said, we don't negotiate on price. The price is the price. So I would focus. The short answer to your question is focus on your costs and understand how much you need to raise the prices of the rest of your services to get you back to your acceptable profit margins, rather than trying to convince them that they need a service that they might not need.
Okay, very good. Well, we are right at time, actually a little bit over, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again so much for your time and insight, Steven, and again, thanks to LandOpt for sponsoring. Now we'll turn it over to Allison to conclude.
Thank you for attending the Beyond the Busy Season webinar sponsored by LandOpt. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the landscapemanagement.net website and will be emailed to you 1 day from today. Please visit the Landscape Management website for information about future events like this one. Thank you for attending. Thank you to LandOpt, and have a nice afternoon.